I am Anna Seawold, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joy in parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. I'm a parent educator, and my mission is to help children by helping parents. The motto of this podcast is raising our children, growing ourselves. The topic of today's exploration is self-love. What is self-love? Shouldn't self-love be already a given thing? Why are we even talking about it? Where do the roots of low or lack of self-love originate? Are there degrees of self-love? Is the opposite of self-love self-hatred? Can you love someone if you don't love yourself fully? And how can you cultivate and practice more self-love? Self-love is one of those overused and sometimes misused concepts. And I am positive you've heard the statement, you just have to love yourself. I am joined today by Natalie Ellis. She's a native of Port-au-Prince, Haiti, currently living in Atlanta, Georgia. She graduated from Georgia School of Professional Psychology in 2000 with a master's in professional counseling. She is the founder of Esteem Counseling and Consulting Services that provides mental health services, trainings, workshops, and supervision to the community, mental health organizations, and other mental health professionals. As a therapist, she serves children, teens, adults, couples, and families who struggle with depression, anxiety, self-esteem, emotional and behavioral problems, and relationship issues. For full episode show notes, additional free resources on parenting, contact info, and ways to work with me, visit authenticparenting.com. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. I would love to hear from you. There are 3 questions that I would love to get your thoughts on. Number 1 is, what's your understanding of self-love? Number 2, can you love someone if you don't love yourself? And number 3, you have to love yourself before someone else can love you. Do you agree with that statement? You can send me a note to the email info@authenticparenting.com. You can leave a voicemail, and I do prefer audio, to the number 732-763-2576. And for international listeners, you can use the free SpeakPipe tool on the contact page of my website, authenticparenting.com/contact. The topic of self-love has been on my mind recently, and I have been posting on Instagram, polling people on this topic, and I would really, really love to hear from you too. Please enjoy this conversation with Natalie Ellis. Okay, so Natalie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Anna. So glad to be here.
Yes, me too. I'm excited to speak with you about self-love, trauma, becoming our true authentic self, and
yes.
all of the million-dollar questions. Right?
Definitely. It is the million-dollar question, especially during this time where people are having to, there's not as much distractions and people are really having to self-assess and look at themselves. There's nowhere else to go but here.
Yes, true. Here you are, right? People usually, they sell notebooks, you see on social media, messaging like, there is only here and now. And that message is so true and relevant for this time. Yes. How do you find this time to be then in terms of your personal growth? Like what shows up for you? Are you enjoying the stillness, not going too many places and being with yourself? Like, what's your personal
Yeah.
reality?
Well, it definitely, it was a little bit hard at first to adjust to just kind of sitting still, especially when it came to work. But in the long run, I had to readjust myself with working from home and creating my home space now into a workspace, or finding a corner of my home to be my workspace. And so I'm all into aromatherapy, music therapy in my office. So I have music in the background, my aromatherapy diffuser is going off. So I had to bring all that to my house so that I could now recreate this space of calmness as I talk about difficult things with clients. And so, so it was an adjustment for me. But what I found is that, man, when you're having to not spend money, when you're not having to not have to do all this stuff, that there's definitely an advantage to it. I've saved money when it comes to eating out and stuff like that. And then just really more time to self-reflect and more time to be creative, whether it's with work or personally, just really processing this notion of that things are continuously changing and that I have to just readjust and readjust. My son graduated this past year, class of 2020. And again, with him too, a lot of losses in regards to school education wise, no prom, no graduation in the traditional sense. And so those are things that we have to learn how to adjust and readjust, and that although it's a loss and identifying those things. So I'm really good at identifying this feeling of discomfort or distress, yet, okay, what can we learn out of this experience? What can we get out of this experience? Because again, when we stay in that place of pain, that place of hurt, that place of distress, it sometimes cripples us. And so we have to then shift, figure out how to get uncrippled or unstuck. So that's been a lot of learning for me in that regards.
What I notice is some people, in my circle, at least, I see people go into hyper productive, working, keeping busy, right? Doing like all sorts of things, baking, cooking, creative projects for themselves, for their kids. And I also see their other type, the other extreme, less productive, enjoying the simple, listening to music, the simple gardening. I see those two extremes. It seems like people are vacillating, or maybe their default mode, let's say the busy person who was always busy and less present, maybe that's more exaggerated now, those states. I don't know. I'm thinking about those questions myself. As I observe my friends, as I talk to different people, I hear their realities, and I compare it to mine. It's definitely very interesting to observe human nature, people's, temperaments, how they observe how they remain still and present. Are they able to, because if the person was used to going to work, going places, movie nights, right? Too many places, they were not able to stay home, be with themselves. What are they doing now? Those type of people sort of like go crazy a little bit. Like I have a friend who is like, what should we do today? And then when we do the thing that she planned, and then she's like, okay, get up, let's go for a walk now. And let's do this. And I'm like, can we just sit down and relax for a moment?
You're absolutely right. I think for those people who aren't used to just being still for whatever reason, right? And sometimes it's because those were questions from my clients, and they questioned their own mental health as a result of that. And some of this is personality. And sometimes, yes, there's people who are workaholics or who are constantly needing to keep themselves busy and keep their minds busy and keep their thoughts preoccupied to avoid things, right? So that's a self-exploration question sometimes, because sometimes we're busy because we're trying to not be still, because that stillness may be too uncomfortable for people. And sometimes we just enjoy doing things. And so we constantly have a need to want to do things and be busy. And so, but you're right. This is definitely a time where no matter who it is, they have to be creative in how they're going to do things from this point on, because you no longer have the norm, right? So
Yes.
there's a new norm.
That
For
there
sure.
is definitely a new norm. So self-love, I've been thinking about this topic since, ever since I invited you to the podcast and I said, this is the topic I want to discuss with you. And of course, I don't know why. It's not like you wrote a book about self-love, but I'm like, I'm going to discuss this topic because it relates to many things that we do as human beings, as parents, right? The way we raise our children, the messages that we received, or the messages that we instill in our children inadvertently, unconsciously even, or maybe we even pass down the very same limiting belief that we received, right? We recreate those situations.
For
So
sure.
I've been thinking about like, what is self-love and why are we talking about self-love? Do we not have it? How do we know if we don't have it? And all of those questions. And so I want to just riff with you, ask your opinion, what you see in the work that you do with your clients, right? Let's elaborate on this topic.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. When I think of self-love, and a few months ago, I did an Ask the Therapist series on this, and I talked about radical self-love. And the definition that I got in regards to self-love is showing interest and affection to yourself thoroughly or radically, right? So showing interest and affection to yourself. And I think when we kind of look at those definitions, showing interest and affection to yourself, a lot of people don't do a good job of that. Right. And so self-love is not about being conceited. Self-love is not about being narcissistic. It's not about ego. It's not about any of that, but it's to genuinely show yourself interest and show affection. And I think as people, we do struggle with that. So there are some things that we can do to kind of become aware of how to be more loving to ourselves. Right. And again, doing that has nothing to do with being selfish, has nothing to do with being narcissistic or egotistical or any of that. So,
and where did we learn not to be affectionate and kind and loving and show interest towards ourselves? Let's go back to the child, to the trauma a little bit and explore how do certain people. So is the opposite of self-love self-hatred? Do you think that?
I think, I was thinking about that question when you posed it to me, and what I come up with, I think it could be seen as self-hatred. In some ways it is, because the action and the thinking and everything leads to that hatred. But I think a lot of it is shame. And so, which is rooted in shame, right? So when we're ashamed of something, then there is that notion, I am bad. And with that bad, then there's a level of hatred that comes with that. Because now, the reason I didn't say it is hatred or self-hatred is because we're not going to say that, because genuinely people don't say they hate themselves.
They may do acts to self-sabotage, right? To destroy themselves, basically.
Surely, yes.
Right?
Yes. Yeah, they do. They do. But I think a lot of that is rooted in shame, not necessarily hate.
Yes. No, I'm here with you completely. Yes. Let's talk about this shame. I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. Right? I mean, we internalize these messages, and then it turns into either whatever messaging we receive, you conclude in your childhood either you're lovable, desirable, welcome, important, special, or not at all, right? And then you base your life off of that, right?
Right. Exactly. And so, I think the key things when I think of self-love, and you ask the question is, well, how do we get to that? Right. So self-love is definitely the first step, is the acknowledgement where you are in that process. Right? Where are you? Where are you in, if we were to identify showing interest and affection to yourself, where are you in that process? So it's about acknowledging where you're at. That's where we got to start.
And can we open that up a little bit? Because that's a very loaded area, right? It could be when we say, are you showing interest and affection towards yourself? How I understand is this, and please help me. Let's open this up a little bit. I understand that I'm treating myself like my body, my spiritual, my heart, my feelings, my boundaries, my needs, my pleasure. Like so much goes into that, right?
So much goes into just loving yourself, right? Exactly. Emotionally, physically, spiritually, behaviorally, sexually, connecting to your needs. And in turn, the needs of others, right? So again, this is not about being selfish. So this is not for you. When we're our best self, inadvertently, we're our best for others, right? So yes, it's a loaded question. And so part of the acknowledgement is, okay, take a moment and see where are you at? And with acknowledgement comes awareness. Where are you at in how you talk to yourself? Where are you at in how you treat yourself? Right? Where are you at in, if it's the spiritual journey? Where are you at sexually? How do you take care of your body? How do you take care of your mind? You know, what do you say to yourself? How do you see yourself? Can you look at yourself in the mirror? You know, that's an activity I do with clients all the time. And people who have a hard time with self-love, they can't even look at themselves in the mirror because of the shame. Right?
Yes, it's part of it is the body shame, the body image, right? And then, but your body is your outside container. I guess if you have a hard time accepting your body, then it's like hard to look inside that even.
Surely. And then interestingly enough too, is then we internalize it, right? So some people, there's the body, what they see, but then if they see that they're a bad person, if this is the message that's been relayed to them, that I'm a bad person, automatically they assume people could see that, right? So they're ashamed of what people can see, which is why they have a hard time looking at themselves, right? You're looking at what you're thinking people are looking at, right? Yes. So yes, it's not just the physical thing, it's even beyond that. If I'm not good at something, if I don't think I'm good enough, if I don't think I'm smart enough, people then become ashamed of what they're seeing if they don't think they're smart enough about something. Because what we're looking at is also what we believe the world is looking at as well, or what others are looking at.
Which is so not true, but we have a hard time believing that.
We do.
Right?
We do.
You get a little blemish. You feel like everybody's looking at that blemish, but nobody even cares.
Nobody even cares. Yes. And that is so true. And which is a big thing to understand, right? So again, how we see ourselves, how we relate to ourselves. And so in turn, how we love ourselves dictates everything, right? So if I don't love myself, then in turn, I'm thinking others don't really love me, which is why people who do have low self-esteem and who do struggle with this, they have a hard time in relationships because it's hard for them to believe that somebody could love them because they don't love themselves.
Yeah.
You know? And so, yeah.
True. And when a person believes that I am not lovable, or I don't deserve this, I don't deserve goodness, I don't deserve love, I don't deserve anything good, they tend to reject all that is good in their life.
They do.
That they self-sabotage and they mess up things. I have a client currently who's going very well between this couple. And then she said, and every time when things are okay, he has to screw it up. And I'm like, wow, this is so true, because he's internally, it's his programming. He doesn't believe, he's scared. When things are too good, he doesn't know how to handle because it's foreign territory. He's never had his own anything, or he didn't believe that he deserves all of this goodness. So they mess up, they start drinking, they don't come home. And so they do things to sabotage their own happiness.
Right. And in that sabotaging, it reaffirms what they already believed.
Right.
And so then it continues. And then that's the cycle. And those are the cycles we want to break. And those are, again, like you spoke about, the generational cycles. So these were cycles that were given to us from our childhood that we continue to carry. Right. Yeah. So in our childhood, the seeds are planted But then it's up to us to figure out how much of that we're going to continue to carry into the next generation, the next generation. And so the work, it's really important to do that work and to take a moment. Okay, what are the messages I learned about myself? And so in my workbook, that is one of the activities in terms of what messages did you learn about you from your mom, from your dad, from social media, from the, the media, from family members? Because when you're a little kid walking around, you don't know, you haven't developed the skill in terms of those self-reflective skills or those skills yet. And so you are defined by what other people are saying and doing around you, right? And you're a toddler, and you're a newborn. But from the beginning, those conditioning is happening. The conditioning is happening from the beginning based on those relationships and how people are treating you. So if people treat you in a certain way, then you start to believe this is what it is. Right? And so needless to say, obviously this person may have their own mental health issues, may have their own issues, but you're a kid, you don't know that. So it's just, if they don't say, I love you, if they don't show me love, they must not love you. So self-esteem, a lot of those things are developed very early on in terms of the connection between parent and child. And so how the parent relates to the child dictates and shapes a lot of things. So you're absolutely right. And then again, those cycles begin and continues.
Yes. And then I also was thinking, and you already sort of answered it, are there degrees of self-love? And by asking that, where are you in the process? You sort of, explain that. Yes, you may be aware that you have this messaging, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That could be like one. You could be in the process, in the beginning process. You just discovered that this is the messaging I received. This is why I don't have lack. I don't have success. Or there's so many messaging.
So many
messages people received in terms of sex, relationships, money, success, right? It's just about everything. Gender, parenting. I mean, there's so many.
There's so many messages. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And we create a narrative based on all those messages. We then create our own narrative based on whatever's been implanted. And we create it and then we take that on. Right. So you're absolutely right. The acknowledgement of, okay, where does this come from? But it takes taking some time to become aware of, okay, what do you tend to tell yourself? So with a lot of clients, that's when I first meet them, that's an assignment. What are some of the messages that you find yourself telling yourself often?
Yes.
I'm not good enough or whatever.
I was going to ask you, how can, let's say someone is not aware, obviously, let's say I am not aware of my full programming, of my full messaging, right? So let's say I know a few and I'm working towards them. That's because I became aware. Maybe somebody pointed out, I went to therapy, whatever the discovery process was for that particular person. How can someone discover where they're stuck, where their stuckness is? Let's say this person is not going to therapy, but listening to this episode, what questions they may reflect upon? Like, what would be helpful, do you think, to uncover our own where we're stuck? For example, yesterday I was speaking with someone and he kept saying the same thing over and over again about a gender stereotype. I don't want to hijack this conversation, but I heard him speak about this and I'm like, wow, he's stuck. He must have received this messaging. So is there a process that you walk through, the people through, or is there something we can question?
Yes. So one of the things I do with clients, I have them draw a triangle of a face of them in the middle, like a happy face of them in the middle. And then on each point of the triangle, I tell them these words. So the top point of the triangle, I say thoughts, right? So your thoughts. And then another point can be feelings. And under feelings, I have them also identify body sensations. And then the third point is actions. right? And then I put arrows going back and forth in all of these components, right? So our thinking leads to our feelings, and our feelings and body sensation leads to our actions, and actions back to thoughts, and then vice versa, right? And so I give them this sample here. And then our thoughts, what I tell them, our thoughts is made up of our perceptions, our beliefs, our values, of everything that we've experienced, right? The narratives, this is what our thoughts are made up of. And then again, everything affects everything. And so what I tell clients is take a moment when you're finding yourself, let's say, thinking something. Okay, I'm thinking this. Okay, especially when we're noticing that a thought is a reoccurring thought, right? Some people have reoccurring beliefs, recurring thoughts. Okay, what is this recurring thought? Okay, this is it. Note that. So I tell people to start noting certain things that they notice come to mind often, right? And then let's take some time to see, okay, this thought right here doesn't invoke certain types of emotions. What are the feelings? When you think of this thought, what does your body feel like? Notice what your body's going through. Headache, stomachache, body tension, heart beating fast, right? And then actions, are there actions that's attached to that? Whether it's at this point wanting to shut down, sleep, right? And so we could start with thoughts, but we could also start with feeling. When you find yourself angry all the time, and sometimes people are like, well, I don't know why I'm angry. Well, okay, now let's slow down. You're noticing you're angry, you're irritable. And notice what you were thinking, what was going on, and identify that. Okay, when you're angry, notice the action that's attached to that, right? And so to begin any kind of healing, to begin to work through anything, we got to first become aware of what we're currently doing, whatever that is, right? We first got to know what we're doing to know, okay, is this a behavior? Is this a thinking? Is this something we want to work on, change, or not, right? And so to do that, we kind of have to take a moment to kind of identify those things. So I can tell clients to get a journal and just begin to pay attention to your actions, begin to pay attention to your feelings, to your body, to your thinking, and see where the connections are with all of that. And like you said, this is for everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
It could be with everything. And so there's just so many things to name. And so with clients, it's like, okay, the main thing you've noticed have been issues in your life. Let's start with those things. And then let's attach, okay, what's the thinking behind that? Okay, what's the emotion attached to that? What's the behavior? What do you notice? And from there, people start to notice patterns, because that's what we're trying to identify: patterns, behavior patterns, emotional patterns, thinking patterns, right? And then our body responds accordingly, right? So there's a connection with mind, body, and soul, right? And again, it's really helping people become connected to all of that. If we're getting headaches all the time, right? And again, not to say it's not a medical issue and we want to always rule out medical issues, but if we're noticing we're getting headache, what is that about? Take the time to figure out, oh, yeah, I am stressed. Okay, there is, just because people don't always connect these things. And part of my role as a therapist is to really help people become aware and connect, make these connections for themselves. Make these connections and put these connections together in regards to their own individual lives, because this is different for everybody. What could be a stressor for me, what could be an issue in terms of a thinking pattern for me, can create a whole positive type of outcome, and for somebody else it creates something totally different. Right? So this is an individual type of work. No one person is the same, because all of our experiences are so different. Right? So this is really an individualized work, right? And there's no good, bad, or wrong in it. Part of the work is figuring out, okay, is this maladaptive? Is it adaptive? Is it functioning? Wherever the client's at, where do you want to change? What do you want to see happen in your life? And that's where we start.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can we talk about how can someone cultivate more self-love?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
What are some areas that this person can look at and take specific steps to become more self-accepting and more self-loving?
Yes. So you said a good word, because the third process to me, so there's the acknowledgement, there's the awareness, and then there's the accepting, right? Because we are humans. So in being human, we have good, bad, and ugliness. That's everybody. We where nobody's perfect, right? We all have our thing that could be considered, and I put this in quote, good, bad, or ugly, right? And learning to and accepting that. So part of radical self-love is loving the things that you have been taught to not love about yourself, right? Because this is the other thing too, right? So there's things about us that society finds not attractive, or somebody finds not attractive, whether it's through physical or whether it's through our personality, whatever it is, right? And so part of going through that acknowledgement stage to see where you're at in regards to the things about yourself that you talk badly about yourself. Well, how do you learn to love that about you? How do you learn to accept those things about you? In that, what we want to change is turning those things into something, okay, this is something I want to work on, right? Versus, because of this thing, I'm not a good person. Because of this thing, I'm not deserving. Because that's the connection. That's the connection that's been taught, right? Because you are this, you are no good. And that's the direct link that we connect with that then creates the shame. And again, when we to cultivate self-love, we have to cultivate even the things about us that we don't necessarily like. And then how to change that mindset about it. How can this thing be a strength to become a strength? Right? Versus this thing being something that we're ashamed of.
Yeah, I think not. I'm thinking not necessarily a strength. I think in some cases, yes, something you can turn some trait or characteristic or whatever you have into a strength. But I think I'm thinking from personal experience here too.
Sure.
Some things you just gotta accept. I think that's enough, right? You don't have to like turn it into a superpower or a strength. Just accept the thing the way it is. Either that's whether it's a physical component. Of course, we're speaking more about the internal world here, not the blemish or the hair or other body parts, but they're all connected. Right. I think just accepting and being okay with that is good enough.
Is enough. You are absolutely right.
Is enough.
And I have an activity on that too in my workbook. That's the other thing that I tell clients. Okay, now let's identify those negatives, right? The negative thoughts that's attached to the feelings. And then how do we shift, right? And so, and although people says, well, I don't believe that though. I believe this. I know I'm not good enough. This is what I still believe. And I'm like, I know you believe that because that's what's been programmed for so long, but doesn't make it accurate. Doesn't make it the case. Right. So, but I get that's what you believe because this is what it's been for so long. But let's try shifting it. Every time you're noticing. And so the awareness help us to say, oh, I'm noticing that. And I've had clients who would say, oh, I'm noticing that I'm about to do something to feed into my negative self-talk because they're recognizing they just did a negative self-talk. Okay, now how do I shift it? And so once we could recognize it and become aware of it, then we could intentionally, because the work that we need to do for love, for whatever, it takes work. And then to do the shift, being intentional with, okay, I am worthy. I am good enough. You know, whatever we need to replace that with, that's going to empower, right? Because the other thing I tell clients too is when we go through that negative cycle, from thinking to feeling to then acting and then thinking to, it just creates more negativity. So first it's helping clients recognize, and they would say that, okay, I've seen my pattern. The pattern is not changing. Okay. First is getting them to see that. And they see it's not changing. Well, if we know it's not changing, we need to do something different. So let's try something different. It's not going to be easy because we're used to doing what we're used to, right? Even if it doesn't serve us. but so recognizing that this negative pattern hasn't really served you. So now we're going to try something else. Let's try shifting it to something positive. Yes, and it does take work. It does take holding yourself accountable. It does take challenging yourself, challenging your thoughts, challenging your emotions, validating it, and yet challenging it. So that's the work. That's the work that continuously have to happen so that we can reach or move towards. And it's an ongoing process. As long as we're living, we're constantly learning. We're constantly developing.
Yes. Yes.
So it's a process.
It's not like you love yourself one day and that's it. That's
Yeah,
it.
that's it. You reach there. Right.
I'm
You're gonna love
done.
yourself forever the same way. No.
Yes. Or
No.
it's not even because I see so much about this in social media. I'm sure you do too. People say, I love myself. I am badass. I am this. Say those words to yourself and you're good to go. Well, no, it takes time and it takes work. It's like you said, shifting our perspective, our mindset, acknowledging, accepting those little parts of ourselves, the way we think about ourselves, changing the critical negative narrative in our mind, self-talk, etc. And also, let's talk about some actions that we can do that also complete go with the self-love process, right? Such as boundaries, setting boundaries for oneself, or saying no to people and to commitments, or getting rid of toxic people from your life.
Right. First, you have to know you deserve that, right? Which is why that work becomes important with that self-love. So oftentimes when people already don't feel that they're worthy, they're trying to keep everybody in their life, right? Because they already don't feel worthy, right? So in doing so, we accept and tolerate a whole bunch of stuff we shouldn't.
True.
Right? Because we're trying not to even lose people. Because with lack of self-love or low self-esteem comes the fear of rejection, fear of abandonment. There's additional fears that we got going on because of that. And so we're just trying to hold on to people that, is this somebody we need to hold on to? And so then with boundaries, we have to kind of understand how come we have poor boundaries, right? Because we teach people how to treat us. People are treating us because this is what we've allowed, whether intentionally or unintentionally, right? And so so I always often ask people when I do these boundary activities, and there's one in the workbook, why do you think you allow somebody in your space that continues to mistreat you? Why do you think that is, right? And so then people start recognizing, well, I don't want to be alone. Okay, I get it. That can make sense. And so we have to first identify that vulnerability. I don't want to be alone. And so whenever that feeling of don't want to be alone comes up, we might tolerate something we know we shouldn't be tolerating. So we have to recognize that. And so then it becomes about you will feel alone at times. And how do you still stick with this boundary? And it does mean a risk. You might lose that person as a result. You might get rejected as a result. And you might get abandoned from this person as a result. And what will that say about you? And so those are all the work that we have to do. And again, it's not easy work. But these are all the questions that has to be answered. Because there's a reason we allow people to cross our boundaries.
Yes. I mean, we have to protect
that work.
We have to protect our energy, our internal resources, our attention, even our time, right?
We do.
Because if we value ourselves, if we love ourselves, then we would value our time, our attention, our internal resources and energy, and not dispose of it so freely, right? Because we would value and hold on to it and give it to people who deserve it, or spend it in a way that is nourishing for us.
Yes.
Right?
That is so true. That is so true.
And another thing that I think about this is we talk about the boundaries, saying no and accepting and all of this, but also allowing yourself to experience joy and pleasure in life, like simple things, right? I often tell my clients, when was the last time like you treated yourself to something that you really like? It's a little splurge, even if it's a cup of coffee, right? Because if you have money mindset issues or undeserving, you may buy things for your children and put yourself like completely not even on the list because of this, right? I'm not deserving. And so by doing small acts of treating yourself, I think that's kindness to self, and also pleasure. Like I've been talking about this recently. I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts around this?
Oh yeah, I'm all about that, right? And so once we could get past this, I want to please people because I don't want to be rejected. I want to make sure everybody likes me. Once we get past that, because that's what's driving a lot of things sometimes for people. Once we get past that, oh, I don't want to be abandoned, then it's like, okay, taking the time in that reflective period, in that awareness and acknowledgement, what are the things that brings you joy? Like you said, what are the things that you like? What are the things that make you feel good? And not only that, but like you said, in cultivating self-love is when you're finding yourself talking to yourself in a way that's derogatory, that's bullying, then again, the mind shifting that. No, you are kind. You are compassionate. You're not perfect, but you are deserving of love. Right? And so being able to, in that acknowledging where you're at, being able to offer yourself words of kindness to yourself, treating yourself well, eating healthy.
Yeah, self-care.
Right? Self-care.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right? Allowing yourself to rest, allowing yourself to show emotion, to express emotion. A lot of people also feel burdened that they can't, that they have to present themselves in a way that can't show any kind of vulnerability, can't show crying or those type of things. And so, again, self-love is allowing yourself to feel what you feel, and it's okay.
Yeah, remaining true to yourself, right? Not hiding your true nature or your authentic self, or hiding those parts of your truth, speaking your truth and feeling your truth and living from that truth. I think that's what I hear you're saying.
For sure.
What would you say about forgiving yourself too? Because I feel like that's big part of the self-love process.
Oh, yes, it is.
Right?
Yes. I have a lot of clients who feel a lot of, again, guilt and shame over certain things, and it becomes hard to let go. And as a result, they continue to punish themselves as a result of that, right? I am bad because of this, I'm bad, or whatever the behavior was, whatever the thing was. And so at some point it's you're going to have to forgive yourself for this thing. In that you did what you knew at that time, whatever that thing was, but oftentimes people make decisions and they feel bad about those decisions because of the negative effects. And yet 10 years later, still want to hold themselves accountable for those decisions. But more so thinking, I should have known better. Well, did you have the information to know better? No, I did what I knew to do. Well, then having compassion for that.
Yeah. I think self-compassion is a good dose of self-compassion if you want to cultivate self-love.
Correct. And so being able to forgive, and so forgiveness goes hand in hand with that, to be able to let go of again some mistakes that they've made or certain things like that. So.
What do you think of? Sometimes people say you can't love someone unless you love yourself. Do you think there is a connection there, or I'm just curious about your thought process
with that? Yes.
With that, I mean, can you love someone if you cannot fully love yourself?
I think you can. I think it's possible to love someone. However, that love can be tainted. And I think it becomes hard to also receive love when you don't love yourself. But I do think it is possible for someone to love someone else. But even in that loving someone else, it's still, if there are some negative self-love, if there's some poor self-love there, I think that would also be translated in a maladaptive way too. But it is easy to love. It is possible to love, because loving someone is, could be seen in so many ways. There's people who love, you hear it all the time. I'm hitting you because I love you, so love can be defined that's the whole other thing. Love can be defined in so many ways too, right? So it's possible to love. The question is, healthy love is the other piece, in a way that love that's, I don't want to say reciprocal, because there's love based on those relationships. There's all kinds of ways love can be defined. But I think it is possible to love, but I would think it's limited, because if you can't truly love yourself, it's hard to love others.
But wouldn't you learn the language of love, so to speak, and to turn it towards you? Let's say a woman, a mother or a father, a parent who is, who is struggling with this self-love issue,
Mm-hmm.
they love their children, right? And through
Mm-hmm.
that process, they know what love is. And perhaps it brings to the forefront what they didn't receive, right? And maybe that's when things shift for them and they start to give some of that love to themselves. You know what I mean? Through the process of loving someone,
Mm-hmm.
we learn how to love ourselves.
Yeah, I think
Right?
what I've seen with clients, I've seen clients where they've seen where their love has been limited in terms of how they're loving their children, how the love has limited, right? And so in that, it's like, okay, well then, what does that say about me? So then they start to do the work, right? For example, we love out of fear. We could love out of fear. We could love in a lot of different ways based on our own trauma. Right. And so with the way that we love, there could be, again, some maladaptive or unhealthy ways of loving. And so I remember that I had a client, one of the things in the way she loved her son was to, again, she wants to protect him. And one of the stories that she talks about is when he was like 5, 6, he was riding a bike and he fell and hurt himself really bad. And so she's like, I was protecting him. So nope, he never got on that bike again. Nope, I wanted to make sure he never got hurt like that.
Oh.
Right. And so that was her way of loving him. And so she gave multiple examples of that. And so fast forward, the son is now 17. And her question to me was, I don't understand why my son doesn't try things, why he doesn't want to do anything. And so, so then I had to bring it back to some of that. Well, I think part of the parenting created some boundaries, created some limitations for him, because if he does anything and he gets hurt or fails, he shouldn't do it. And I think that's the way you parented, because you want to protect him from being hurt. You wanted to protect him from falling, because that's your way of showing love. But what in turn taught him is, if I'm going to fail, if I'm going to fall, I shouldn't do this. And so here's 17. He's not going to try out for the basketball team if he doesn't think he has a chance.
Yesterday, oh my gosh, you're so true. Yesterday, my client told me, my kids are so lazy. They don't want to do anything. They don't want to help around, chores and things like that. And then we got into like opening up, the whole learning more about her and how she parents. And it turns out, of course, it has to be my way. I tell you what to do and how to do it. And when I come home, it's going to be done this way and all of that. And then when I connected it to why they don't want to participate, because they have no say, no autonomy, no responsibility, no room to make a mistake and learn on those mistakes, she's like, wow, have I been doing this wrong? And have I been making them lazy? Like, she was questioning herself. And so again, this is, we're coming to full circle. This is how we started our conversation. The messages that we receive in childhood, this is exactly what it is, right? It could be like that. And some of the messages, unfortunately, could be so crippling. Some of them could be not so harmful. It's a large, continuum.
It is a large continuum.
Right? It's a large continuum. For someone, it could be, I'm scared of failure and I don't want to try new things. But for the other person, it could be, I'm not deserving of anything good. And they get into cutting, self-harm, addictive, and all sorts of behaviors that can even end in suicide, unfortunately.
Yeah. There's all kinds of things. Just yesterday, I had a male client who came in. And one of the things he said is he wanted to work through some things. And he said the story of mom who he didn't grow up with his dad. The mom remarried, but the stepfather passed when he was 13. And so one of the things he recognized at 13, he had to be the man of the house, right? So just the nature of that at 13 creates its own set of independence or feeling as if you have to do everything, right? Which is, again, the message that he got indirectly, right? These are things happen indirectly, directly, however way. But there's messages that we see that we take on. So those are the messages he took home. Mom was grieving and mom also had a 2-year-old. He knew he didn't want to bother mom. He knew he needed to do things for himself at 13. And he said it at 13, I didn't have any emotional support. Now my mom was a great provider, but I knew I couldn't go to her for anything because she was dealing with a lot already. Right. So it sounds typical. This is a lot of what kids go through. Right. But in that, I have to figure out on my own. And so he talked about now years later as an adult, he was in a situation where he lost his job and he was out of work for a year. And in that, the depression came. But as he's rethinking about everything, as we talked about things, he said, there's things I could have done differently. I could have asked for help, but I've been conditioned to not ask for help. I've been conditioned to figure it out on my own. Right. And so again, with clients, what I tell them, a lot of things, it's figuring out so his question to me was, is there such a thing as too much independence? Can you be told too much? And it's not about being the independence itself. It's great that you're independent. The thing is when you're thinking and what you're doing, it becomes so narrow that it now becomes a disservice to you because it's so narrow. You want to figure it out on your own to the point where it's a disservice because you have people that could have potentially helped you. You could have asked for help, right? And so again, what does asking for help mean about you? What is all this? So those were the questions back to him. What would that have meant for you? You know? And so those are the things that I tell clients to then question, right? And so because he could have done other things that could have made the situation not as, but those were lessons he needed to go through to figure those things out.
Wow. Interesting. So let me ask you a different question to conclude this conversation. Do you think, well, and this is a racial question, do you think white people receive different types of messaging versus Black people? Or do Black people receive on top of what we all receive? Is there like racial messaging that Black people receive?
Yes.
In working with your own clients? You know, I'm curious, what do you see?
Yes. Yes.
Right?
There's different messages within each of those communities that happen. And there's a larger message that this society has given. So, right. So again, we're still dealing with the effects of slavery. We're still dealing with those things. We're still traumatized and continue to be re-traumatized by those things because those messages are still being put out there, directly and indirectly. And the simple example of that is if I sit down and watch the news, all I'll see is all the crimes that Black men do. That's all I'll see. If we see the news, you'll see all the crimes that Black men are doing throughout. Now, not to say we don't do crimes. Yeah, sure, that's possible. But, you know, we all do crime. But the thing is, we're not the only ones doing crime, though. So if you're gonna put something out there, you got, for it to be fair, for it to be whatever, it needs to be across the board. But when you're only showing something one group of people do, and that could be in however way, whether it's positive, negative, whatever, then now you're trying to create biases and stereotypes. And here we are. And yes, because there is a fear of Black men, but understandably so, because if you watch the news, that's the only people doing crimes out there. You know, so and that's a simple thing on a simplistic way, and that's a problem.
But in terms of growing up in households and hearing, you know, through parenting, what I mean? That's
those messages.
That's the angle I'm more interested in.
Yes. So yes, there are those. And even with the racial thing, there are those, right? So I have a 17-year-old son. So I have to tell my 17-year-old son, make sure you ask for a receipt when you go in the street. Make sure you don't put your hood on when you drive around.
Wow.
Right? Make sure your hood is off. Make sure make sure you do certain things so you don't present a way that people could feel threatened by you. You know, so there's a message there. Those are messages in terms of our Black males that's being delivered, right? So there's messages because of this notion of we're not good enough as Black people, right? You have to make sure you do work harder. Make sure you make A's. Make sure you do this. Make sure you do that. So this notion of having to do more, having to push more. So there's certain messages that's like that. You know, in terms of messages about your child, you're to be seen and not heard. That's a message, and that message too is a big deal, because I have clients, they're adults, and they have a hard time speaking up, using their voice, because they've been conditioned. You don't say what you feel. You don't talk about what you're thinking. Nobody wants to hear what you got to say, because parents is a first teacher, right? As parents, we're the first teacher of everything. So in the same way I'm teaching you how to tie your shoe, I'm teaching you also how to assert yourself or not assert yourself, how to speak up for yourself or how to not speak up for yourself. And in my household, if you don't say it, if I'm telling you, no, your opinion doesn't count, it's not what you say, then that's what you learn for the first 17 years of your life or so. And so when it's time to now be out here in the community, there are some confusion. And so I have a lot of clients who struggle with their voice, defending themselves and advocating for themselves, because that's not anything they were taught to do. And now they're adults and having to learn to do that. But some of that stuff starts at home.
True.
And so.
Well, Natalie, we can talk about this subject, endlessly fascinating. Where can the listener learn more about you, follow you on social media? We are connected together on Instagram, my favorite social media platform.
Yes.
Why don't you share where can the listener find you online?
Yes, definitely. So again, my name is Natalie Ellis, and I have a private practice in the Decatur, Georgia area. My practice is Esteem Counseling and Consulting Services, and Esteem stands for Empower Self Through Enrichment, Education, and Motivation. And you can find me on all the social medias through Esteem Counseling Services. And so, thank you so much for having me. I enjoy having these talks. The more people can become, again, more aware of mental health and more aware of and be a part of these discussions, then we can do the necessary work to healing and to self-love. So thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I agree. Thank you for being here.
Definitely.